I'm Molly Godfrey. I'm Associate Professor of English and Director of the AAAD Study Center. My book, Conversations with Lorraine Hansberry, came out in December of 2020. It is a collection of interviews that Hansberry did beginning in 1959, which is when her play, A Raisin in the Sun, premiered on Broadway. She was the first African-American woman to have a play on Broadway. And the play really ushered in a new era of Black representation on stage and the screen. And she quickly became a household name and a public intellectual who spoke fiercely on the topic of civil rights, as well as forcefully on the topic of the craft of drama, on topics such as feminism, and on the need for global Black liberation and decolonization. What I found most exciting about working on this project is that many of the interviews that she did were not available in print before this book. Many of them were conducted on the radio or on television. So many had not even been transcribed. So I was able to locate really almost every interview that I think she did in her short lifetime, and to put those amazing words into print, many of them for the first time. Some of the material, some of the interviews that are collected here also aired in edited or truncated form, and so I was able to recover the material that had been cut from the original broadcasts, and in many cases that material is the most exciting parts because it's the parts where she speaks on topics that were maybe considered too taboo for her time, topics about feminism and decolonization and Pan-African liberation.
Hi, I'm Beth Henderson, Associate Professor of Art History here at JMU. Dr. Steve Peraza from SUNY Buffalo State and I co-edited this book, More Than Our Pain, Affect and Emotion in the Era of Black Lives Matter. It was released by SUNY Press in 2021. The book considers the different ways in which emotion and affect are central to protests from 2013 forward, especially in relationship to the way in which affect and emotion appeared in protest and activism of the civil rights era of the 50s and 60s. The emotions that are featured in the book are righteous rage, anger, grief, fury, love, mourning, as well as fatigue and joy. Steve and other contributors in the book, as well as myself, consider how these emotions have different resonances with different audiences. What are the social and cultural backgrounds from which these emotions find their significance? And I've been very fortunate that Steve, as well as other contributors in the book, have been able to come to a roundtable discussion of this book at the JMU conference. Thanks to Lauren Elaine, who's also a professor at JMU, and Shona Wilson from CUNY for this conversation. I hope that you get a chance to look at the book. Thanks so much.
Hi, I'm Brooks Hefner, professor in the English department at JMU. And in December 2021, I published this book, Black Pulp, Genre Fiction in the Shadow of Jim Crow. This book is a recovery project that seeks to elevate and amplify the voices of writers of Black popular fiction published in African-American newspapers that were nationally distributed between the late 1920s and the early 1950s. Part of what excited me about this project, as someone who has worked for many years in popular fiction and popular genres, is that in the pages of these newspapers, and in many cases long forgotten by literary scholars, amateur and semi-professional writers, as well as some professional writers, were building an entire archive of anti-racist genre fiction. Fiction that took the formulas of popular genres, like the romance, detective stories, science fiction, identified the problematic elements of these formulas, in many cases steeped in white supremacist frameworks, disassembled them and rebuilt them in the service of narratives of racial justice. And so what I really hope to accomplish in this book is to shine a light on these long forgotten writers, and to build connections between writing from this period, in the shadow of Jim Crow in the 1930s and 1940s especially, and our present moment when we see such a flowering of exciting Black genre fiction and popular fiction in comics and film and in literature. And so it was exciting for me to be able to be the conduit for a lot of this information, to bring these stories and writers into the present moment, and to think about a longer history of anti-racist genre fiction. Thanks.
In Radical Utu, Critical Ideas and Ideals of Wangari Muta Matai, Dr. Basi Mohanja presents the words and works of Matai as theoretical concepts attesting to her contributions to gender equality, democratic spaces, economic equity and global governance, and indigenous African languages and knowledges. Mohanja's well-rounded portrait of Matai's ideas offers a corrective to the one-dimensional characterization of Matai's typical of other works. Wangari Muta Matai was a scholar activist known for funding the Greenbelt movement, an environmental campaign that earned her the Nobel Peace Prize. While many studies of Matai highlight her activism, few examine Matai as a scholar whose contributions to various disciplines and causes spanned more than 3 decades. In this loving, well-researched, and beautifully written book, Dr. Mohanja brings out the other side of distinguished environmentalists and Nobel laureates, Wangari Muta Matai, that of thinker and activist scholar. By focusing on the philosophical and theoretical legacies of Matai's work, the book takes us beyond the controversies and headlines to provide a powerful analysis of the philosophical thinking that drove her activism. Radical Utu is a model of how to prioritize African thinkers in the production of global knowledge.
Hello, I'm Stephen Paulson. I'm a professor here in the sociology department at JMU. And this past year, I wrote a book, Racism on Campus, A Visual History of Prominent Virginia Colleges and Howard University. It looked at yearbook content for 10 Virginia colleges over the past 100 years, beginning roughly in the 1890s, turn of the century, including JMU, along with visual content that was issued by Howard University. And ultimately, the anchor I was using for the book was Bonilla Silva's concept of structural racism. And I wanted to, in a visual manner, represent just how integral and important race was in terms of structuring life at campuses and universities throughout Virginia, certainly in the early periods when these yearbooks were first published, but well after the Second World War, through the period of massive resistance to school desegregation, and that the vestiges of this past period certainly have relevance to how campuses are organized in confronting racism today. I'm excited about a few things. I'm hoping that the book stimulates some conversation as we address DEI issues on campus and statewide. I'm actually excited about the visual methods that were used. And if anyone wants to get in touch with me or have me talk about the work, I'd be more than happy to do it. Thanks.
Hey everybody, Case Watkins, Justice Studies at JMU. Palm oil diaspora is the product of 12 years of labor and love. It all started as I was sitting in a cobblestone alley in Bahia in northeast Brazil, and I was devouring a bowl of the delectable Afro-Brazilian seafood stew moqueca, and I called out, "O que é isso, gostoso? What is this buttery goodness?" My friend snapped back, "Gringo!" That's palm oil. Dendê, as it's known in Brazil. It grows in palm forests down along the coast, and you should go check it out. So I spent much of my time since then learning as much as I could about the forests and communities that produce and distribute palm oil in Bahia and beyond. Dendê became a passion, obsession, turned into articles, then a dissertation, and finally a sprawling, some may say overwritten, I prefer meticulous, book. In my research, I quickly found out that not only was palm oil an essential ingredient in Afro-Brazilian food and religious cultures, it's the most produced and traded edible oil in the world. Today, it's mostly grown in plantation monocultures in Southeast Asia, but much like its native West and Central Africa, most palm oil comes from biodiverse groves spread throughout the forest. So with this book, I work toward two major objectives. First, I reconstruct the transatlantic histories and geographies of palm oil landscapes, cultures, and economies in Bahia and the broader Atlantic world. The book shows how, despite the atrocities of colonialism and transatlantic slavery, Brazilians of African descent transformed environments and societies with their knowledge, environmental ethics, and agricultural skill. It shows how, along with African-descended people, the African oil palm and its products were key agents in these transformative processes. Then I build on that historical treatment to ask, what can we learn from Dendê? The story of palm oil in Bahia shows us one of the many ways that Eurocentrism has silenced and ignored African and diasporic contributions to world histories and geographies. In recognizing these contributions, this book provides insights for healthier forms of agricultural development and environmental policies, and it carves out space for other ways of knowing and being in the world that reveal to us paths towards social and environmental justice. So the thing I think that excites me most about this book is not only does it shine a light on the cultural, environmental, and economic power of the African diaspora, but it has given me opportunities to stay engaged with rural communities in Brazil and contribute to conversations on public policy there. So thanks so much, y'all. Enjoy the conference. Cheers.
I'm Kristen Wiley, Associate Professor of Political Science and Faculty Affiliate with AAAD, Latin American, Latinx, and Caribbean Studies, and Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies. I'm delighted to introduce my book, Party Institutionalization and Women's Representation in Democratic Brazil. This book came out in 2018 and was based on my dissertation research from 2008 to 2009 and follow-up fieldwork I conducted in 2012, 2014, and 2015. In that fieldwork, I conducted over 100 interviews with women candidates who ran and won and women candidates who ran and lost, as well as with feminist activists and scholars from throughout the country, party officials, so including party elites and party members in the rank and file, and local, state, and national level bureaucrats from women's ministries throughout Brazil to try to uncover what the obstacles were that were confronting women political aspirants. And so the research departs from the empirical puzzle that despite having one of the region's strongest and most multivocal women's movements, as well as an electoral gender quota since 1998, and proportional representation elections, all factors that have translated into gains in women's representation in other countries around the world, Brazil still remains one of the lowest ranked countries in the region in terms of women's representation, with just 15% women in their parliament. And so what I show in the book is that political parties hold the key to increasing representation, and that parties need to be both willing and able to recruit and support viable women's candidacies. And so parties that are best positioned to do so are those that have inclusive internal leadership structures. And so they have women in positions to let the ladder down to other women in the potential kind of candidate pool. And then also parties that are organizationally strong. And so a key takeaway point from the research is that parties can and should increase the quality of democracy in Brazil and elsewhere by diversifying their internal ranks and developing concrete party platforms that are focused in idea-based campaigns, so kind of party strength and identity. Another key takeaway point from the book is that women's experience is not a monolith, and that the obstacles that they face along their political trajectories differ quite markedly based on their racial identity, the political parties that they're running with, and the electoral districts where they run. And so I hope that some of the key takeaway points here are that there remains a gap between the people and our elected officials that can be mitigated by the increased representation of diverse women. I have thoroughly enjoyed working on this book project, and I am looking forward to the next one.